Now we are going to work on the test for the component which shows logo, and as we can see it consists of another component called base icon, because in our application the logo is represented by a simple icon. So I'm going to switch over to the editor, duplicate one of the current tests, let's call new test file the logo.test.ts, and then I'm going to remove everything from here, leave only one testing scenario. Here we're gonna say that it renders logo. First of all, I'm going to use shallow mount function to render the logo component. And then, as we usually do, let's take a look at the markup of this component in the terminal. I'm gonna call method HTML to get the markup. Even though we have shallowly rendered this component, meaning that all child components have been replaced with stubs, we still can check that the proper icon has been used for this logo. And the way we can do so is by calling findComponent method on this wrapper object to find the component called base icon. And then I'm simply going to check that the prop called name gets proper value. If we'll switch over to the logo component, here we can see that we are passing icon with the name clock to the prop called name. So I'm gonna use the same expression right here in the to-be method call. And now I'm going to wrap all this expression within function expect. And before actually checking test result, I prefer to firstly show what value we're going to get. In this property name, I'm going to print it out in the console first. By the way, in order to consolidate the code a little bit, let's combine these two lines into one. I'm going to inline this function called shallow mount into this expression like so. And there we go. In the terminal we are seeing the icon name, which is clock, just like we expect. So now we are ready to finalize our expectation. I'm also going to use shallow mount function colon here, import all necessary things, and let's check test results. So this was one way how we can check that the proper icon has been used for the logo, but there is also another one. Let's see how we can rewrite this expectation. So in here, after we have found component base icon, within this component, we can also try to look for clock icon component. This is the component which represents an icon. And this component comes from a third-party library called HeroIcons. So now we can call method exists to check that the clock icon is actually present in the markup. And then we're gonna compare the result of this method call with true, like so. Alright, now let's open up module called icons.ts. This is the module which holds all our used icons in the application. And all of those icons, as we can see, are imported from the third-party library HeroIcons, and one of those icons is our icon that we need for the test called clock icon. So in our test, I have used the same import to import clock icon component from the HeroIcons library, and just because icon component is the child of the logo component, in this case, we cannot use shallow mount function to render the component, because in this case, all child components will be replaced with stubs. So we have to use mount instead. So let's see if the icon markup will be rendered. I'm gonna print out the whole markup of this component by calling method HTML, and there we go. In the terminal we are seeing that the SVG tag has been rendered. And the test passed. But I actually prefer using the first way of checking if base icon component is present with the proper icon inside, so I'm gonna leave the first expectation. The next testing scenario that we are going to write for the logo component will be as follows. We're going to check that this href attribute receives proper value. Moving on to defining the second testing scenario, I'm going to duplicate the first scenario. In here, let's change the description. Here we'll basically say that it has a href attribute with the timeline page hash. And the way we're gonna check it is this. we can simply call method attributes, specifying which attribute value we are about to check. And then, by using matcher to b, we're gonna compare the received value in the attribute href with that exact value which is used inside this href attribute in the logo component. So I'm gonna copy this whole value and paste it in this to be matcher, like so. Alright, now let's import page name enumeration and check the result of test execution. The test is passing, but the moment I'm going to change the value in this href attribute, for example, let's use name of the progress page instead of timeline page. Right after that, we're gonna see that the test will start to fail. So that means that our test is testing proper behavior. In the next testing scenario, we're going to check that whenever we're going to click on the logo while being on the timeline page, the page should be scrolled to the current timeline hour, because on this page, every timeline item component represents every hour in the day. So let's write description for this testing scenario. I'm gonna say that it scrolls page to current hour on click if timeline page is open. Firstly, I'm gonna extract rendering of this component on its own line in here. And now let's check what is actually going to happen when we click on the logo. As we can see right here, we have handle click listener registered that will handle click event. And what is happening inside this listener is this. We have this ternary expression, and if current page is timeline page, we're going to call scroll to current hour function, which is basically do the scrolling of the page to current hour. And since this function, scroll to current hour, is imported from another module, we can just make sure that this function will be called after we're gonna click on the logo while being on the timeline page. So we're gonna do so by using spy. Let's create here the new spy with the name scroll to current hour spy. As the first parameter into this spy on method, we're passing that module which holds the function that we are about to spy on, and the function name will be scroll to current hour. And of course we have to get the reference to this timeline items module, and we can do so by importing all the experts and grouping them under timeline items name, like so. And after doing that, we are ready to check our expectations. But before, we have to perform an action which will lead to that function scroll to current hour being called. And we know that we have to perform a click on the logo component, so I'm going to call trigger with the event name, which in this case will be click, like this. And now let's write a couple of expectations that are going to check that our function scroll to current hour has been called exactly one time, and also that this function has been called with the argument that we expect. And this argument, as we can see, has to be true. And also to force this condition turn to true, we have to specify that the current page has to be timeline page. So we have to somehow modify the value of this current page reactive variable. We are importing this variable from the router module, so I'm gonna do the same in our test file to get this reactive variable current page. And then we can basically modify the value of this variable in any way we want. Since we need to mock the situation where we are on the timeline page, I'm going to assign the name of the timeline page to the current page reactive variable, like so. After doing this, that expression inside handle click listener will turn true, and our function scroll to current hour will be called. And that is exactly what we are checking in the test. Finally, it's time to check test results. It is passing. And if I'll change the name of the page For example, let's assign name of the progress page to the current page constant. In that case, that condition inside the listener will turn false, and the function scroll to current hour will not be called, because the second part of this ternary expression will be executed, and that is why the test is failing. But we also have guarantees that scroll to current hour function will be called with arguments that we expect, and if we will change this argument, test is going to notify us about it. Alright, also let's not forget that since we have used mocks in this test, they have to be restored. I'm going to call method restore all mocks at the end. And finally, let's add one more testing scenario where we're going to check that the second part of that ternary expression has been executed. So the description will say that it navigates to timeline page on click if another page is open. Let's see in the browser what is going to happen if I'm gonna click on the logo while being on a different page. We are redirected to the timeline page, and that is what we're checking in this testing scenario. So in order to make the second part of this ternary expression execute, we have to make this expression turn false. And to do so, we just have to assign any other page name to current page value other than timeline. For example, let's assign name of the progress page. And after this, we're going to set up the spy, which is going to spy on navigate function. This function gets imported from the router module. So we're gonna do the same in our testing file. First of all, let's set up the spy for the navigate function. I'm gonna pass proper module as the first parameter into this spy on method call. Let's also import all the things from the router module and group them under router name, like so. So we get access to the router module and can use it to set up the spy. And also whenever we have referenced current page reactive variable that was imported from the router module, now we have to reference this variable via router module name like this. Let's get back to our test, change the name of this spy, let's call it navigate spy, reference this name in both of these expectations. And also we will check that navigate function will be called with the argument that we expect. So I'm gonna copy this argument and paste it into this expectation. So let's go over all this logic once again. Before we're gonna perform the click on the logo, we are assigning name of the progress page to the current page reactive variable, which basically means that we currently have progress page open. And then we're going to click on the logo, which is going to lead to navigate function being called with the argument which corresponds to timeline page name, since we are about to be redirected to timeline page. And there we go, the test is passing. Let's go back to the logo component and try to modify this expression. For example, let's compare the value of the current page variable with the name of the progress page. In that case, the first part of this expression will be executed and navigate function will not be called. And that is why the test is failing. It is usually good to modify implementation of some logic that we are testing to make sure that the test is going to fail and to know that we are actually testing the right thing. At the end, I'm going to group these lines to separate 3 stages of this test: preparation, action, and expectations. And the same thing I'm going to do with the previous test. Let's run all tests in the project. They are all green. We are ready to move on to the next lesson.